Me to thank you and Best Red and Samantha and Shuniz very much for publishing this kind of work, which is very essential. We're looking at World Champions, the story of South African rugby by John Witch. And I know, having worked with you, that they've also done several of the cricket histories and a lot of other very progressive publications dealing with everything from arms industries to poverty and all sorts of things. So you guys do very important work. So although we're not a big crowd here, we're very lucky in what we've got. So I'd like to just, speak about the writers. I'm really a cricket historian who did a little bit of writing on rugby history, having worked, I would say about 40 years on the history of sport, done my 10,000 hours a couple of times. But the funny thing is that some of the people here are exactly in the same boat. So Dougie Oakes is a veteran non-racial sports writer since the 70s. And Mr. Witten, what's your first name? Donovan Witten comes from an old sporting family in the Cape. Hendrik Snyders is probably the most active rugby historian, I would say, in South Africa at the moment. And he's been doing a lot of intense work over a long time. And Bolly, over here, was a Western Province inside centre, he says. Played Saru rugby for the national team as a lock. Very dynamic and in-your-face guy. And then Muhammad Ali is a very close friend of mine. We played cricket together. And Muhammad is so polite that you don't realize how professional and accomplished he is. So he's a journalist who's done a lot of broadcasting for the BBC in all sorts of areas, including he took the initiative in the 1990s to go to the away games of Bafana Bafana, sometimes on his own cost, in Ouagadougou and all these places. So he was one of the first South Africans to go and watch football on the continent. And I remembered, a lot of these broadcasts. And the Olympic Games, he went also to Tokyo, always using his initiative as a freelancer. A wonderful friend and writer, but also now has just written an amazing book on it's called A City Apart, which is about the history of the city and suburban rugby union, 1898 to 1992. That's one of the oldest black rugby bodies in South Africa. They already had their own field and pavilion that they bought in 1913. It survived all the way through to 1992. It's an incredible story. And Muhammad has finished the book. He's written it up. Dougie has helped edit it. And I can't wait to see that book. With this World Champions is about the overall story, told, I think Hendrik said earlier, and I want to give everyone a chance to talk. It wrote a very detailed history that will be difficult to beat in terms of overview histories, in terms of the depth and the new information about it. And we'll come back a bit more to that. Muhammad has written the history of one rugby union in Cape Town. And that again, in the same, I'm already starting to tell my little story that I prepared. But I'll come back to that. But so we've got the mega story and the focused one subject story, and both of them go into detail that we've never known before. Both of them break open old narratives completely. The old histories in sport are like the Bantu education textbooks in the 1980s. And I always use this. I've used it for 20 years, but I just love the descriptions. Some of those I taught at UNISA for 18 months, and some of my colleagues wrote those books that were used in the apartheid schooling system. Some of them went to 16 editions. So you know how much money those people made on producing this history. In these books, the history of South Africa for school children, Bantu education or Christian national education, there were only 6 black people that appeared in the book, the matric book. Of the 6, one was President, that's another story. One was Gandhi, and the others were Kaiser, Matanzima, Mr. Swartz of the Colored Representative Council, and 2 or 3 other people. There was no Mandela, no Sobukwe, no Biko, no Soweto, no Sharpeville, no Baluk. Someone said no blood was spent on these pages, or spilt on these pages, and they were to knowledge what the black hole, were to history what the black hole is to matter, a kind of anti-knowledge. So Hendrik was speaking today as well about a topic that he's recently discovered, and there's one line of it in a South African history of rugby book that he's looked at. And similarly to us in cricket, the first 4 volumes of the history of South African cricket covered several thousand pages of writing, and there's only one scorebook from 1870s to 1960, one scorecard with black names in it, in all that time. And we've now written, us and an extended group, more than 10 books just on those people's experiences. So the one line has become 10. It must become 50 still, but more importantly, it's totally destroyed that old apartheid narrative that saw black people as somehow absent, fully within the colonial mentality in which presence was everything. If you weren't present there, then the colonial could feel this is their game, and that's how they spoke about it and wrote about it. So it's incredibly important work from a mental, political, human, and all other intellectual and other dimensions that we are doing in sport at the moment. And this project has been going on for more than 20 years in a very focused way. Cricket has led the way because we've been lucky also in Durban to have people like Ashwin Desai, Krish Reddy, Ghulam Vahed, and the guy who's just died, the economist, his name escapes me, but like very skilled people have written about that, and it's really amazing to see these volumes come out. They're still not selling in great numbers, but the effect on the overall narrative is massive, and I'm sure that that's the case. That hi, welcome. So Muhammad, good luck with your book. And I asked Muhammad, as someone who's been reading and researching and writing for a full year, at least, to kick off tonight a bit and talk about the book for us. So thanks very much, Mo, for agreeing. And this is the way we pay tribute to Jonty today. He also has written for at least 40 years. And I've never seen a guy who quietly gets into an archive like he does in whatever town he happens to be. He now lives in the south of Spain, and I hope the heat, there's a bit of air conditioning there because it's been very, very hot recently. But that's how he literally, in Spain, has retired and keeps writing about South African rugby and cricket. It's amazing. No? Thanks very much.
You can hear me? Yeah.
I think it's being recorded.
Oh, okay.
So let's just do it from there.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Thanks very much for the introduction. I didn't think you would remember Ouagadougou and Bamako and all those places. But yeah, those were, and actually, just as a little bit of an aside, that actually proved to me that poverty is not necessarily related to violence, because I've never seen poverty as I did in Mali and Ouagadougou, and you will find the most honest people, the most honorable people in those. I remember very well in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, which literally translates as land of the upright men. And we had a problem with getting an ISDN line through to London, and my colleague wanted to offer one of the technicians something, and we're not allowed to do that. And that's how these people operate there, much poorer than we could imagine from South Africa. And yeah, but I was deeply honored by the city and suburban officials when they asked me to write something on the history of City and Suburban Rugby Union. And to be honest with you, I really did not anticipate finding what I eventually did. And tribute to City and Suburban and their officials, they were always a wonderfully administered union. Pity about the record on the field. They only managed to win the Rhodes Cup once, and that was it. And they only won the Rhodes Cup because Western Province played 3 games in the space of 18 hours or something, and they played Western Province in the final, so they just about beat it by 9 points to 8. I mean, it's just absolutely amazing that a union that was established in 1898 can have the minutes perfectly intact. The quality of the ink and the paper and the binding of the minute books is probably better than what you would find today. And that's been an absolutely vital, crucial source of authentic information. And I mean, I've seen publications before, and not to discredit those publications, simply because those records weren't available. I've actually been able to correct some information. Like, for example, the founding clubs, the 8 founding clubs of the union, some have, for example, mentioned the Stock Rangers as a founding member of cities, which wasn't the case. They only joined in 1912. But, and interestingly, coming from an area like District 6, which was celebrated for its diversity and its coexistence among different population groups and religious groups and whatever, cities wasn't formed until 12 years after the Western Province Coloured Rugby Union was formed, the Greenpoint-based union, which was formed in 1886. And the reason was probably because they wanted to maintain, I would call it racial purity, because they wanted a Christian union, which is why the clubs that eventually, the 8 clubs that formed City and Suburban were clubs that believed in forming an exclusively Christian union. And that is probably the reason why we didn't have one Western Province union among the disenfranchised to start with. And interestingly, because of the different sub-unions that existed in the Western Cape, the officials felt that they needed a single controlling body here to regulate the movement of players, because some of the top players would move from club to club and from union to union. And as a result of that, they formed the Western Province Coloured Rugby Football Board in 1936. But because the Western Province Coloured Rugby Football Board was mixed, cities then broke away and started the Western Province League. And that same league lasted right through till the 1990s, which played on with the South African Rugby Board. I digress, but if that hadn't happened, then we would probably have had one single Western Province union playing non-racial rugby in the Western Cape. And in fact, the South African Coloured Rugby Board were keen on establishing a single Western Province union to participate in the Rhodes tournaments. And unfortunately, that didn't happen. But just coming back, you mentioned that cities had the foresight to buy their own grounds. And in fact, they ended up being one of only 2 unions that owned their own ground the other one was Griquas, I think the Universals Club and another club owned the Ayara Bus Stadium in Kimberley. But what triggered that was that cities and Western Province were the two unions operating at that time, and they would compete for the hiring of grounds in the Cape Town area. So they would, for example, hire the Greenpoint track from Greenpoint Cricket Club, who were the main tenants from the City Council. They played at the Rhodes Recreation Ground, which is just across the road from the Hermiston Museum. And very interestingly, they hired the Claremont, the ground that was hired from Claremont Cricket Club, who were the main tenants, from Villages Rugby Club. Now, Villages we all associate with Brookside, but Villages only moved to Brookside in 1937, and before that, they actually played at the ground next to the mosque in Stegman Road, next to the railway line, which was the ground that Claremont Cricket Club played at. Where Palmyra Junction is right now. And just look at how cunning Villages were, because Villages hired the ground from Claremont Cricket Club for the summer months for 6 months at a fee of £125. They sublet the ground to cities for 2 weekends and they got £65 for those 2 weekends. And the same applied to Western Province. And you mentioned the one-liners. This I picked up in a one-liner from A.C. Parker's book on the centenary of Western Province rugby. That the Western Province rugby, the coloured rugby football unit that was based at the Greenpoint track, actually played at Newlands on a Monday. They played their club fixtures at Newlands on a Monday. That was one of the venues that they used. And in fact, City and Suburban and Western Province, who were rivals for all those years, actually played one of their first provincial games at Newlands in what became known as the hospital games, to raise money for hospitals in the Western Cape. They probably needed to repay, for the use of the services. But they actually raised a figure of about £90, which today translates to 220,000 rand.
That social purpose was there.
Absolutely, absolutely. And cities realized that because they were spending money on hiring grounds, why not let us purchase our own ground, and then we can hire out the ground to cricket in summer or athletics or whatever. And that's exactly what they did. And they first hired the ground in 1913 from the Madison family. It was a farm. And in 1920 they purchased the ground outright. The ground, for your information, is on the western side of St. George's Grammar School, where St. George's Grammar School is at the moment. And to the left, to the where Settlers Way is. That was the ground until 1959 when they were removed. But they were clever. They hired out the ground and they got income from that, and they were able to pay off the ground in 20 years.
And that's the group areas.
Yeah. And unfortunately, because of the Group Areas Act, they were forced to move in 1959. They moved to the present City Park, where City Park is now in Thornton Road. And that again became a community venue. I mean, it was a venue that hosted the funerals of Imam Harun, for example, and people who were killed during the unrest. It was a venue that hosted inter-schools and inter-house athletics meetings. It was a venue that hosted hockey. In summer they played baseball. The Christmas choirs were there over the Christmas period. Even wrestling. And even Mangosuthu Buthelezi and Sunny Leon had a meeting there. The Labour Party and Inkatha Freedom Party had a meeting there in 1973. So it became a fantastic community venue. And even in the 80s, the UDF had clandestine carols by candlelight meetings there. So that just shows you the initiative that was started by the city and suburban officials in 1930, when it was carried right through to the 1990s, in that they provided a community venue. And again, when they purchased or they moved to City Park, they got £3,000 from the department, the divisional council as it was then. And very quickly they issued debentures and raised money in various ways. And within 7 years they paid off the bond, and the ground was theirs once again. So
they were forced to leave their land at a price set by the state, lower than market value.
Absolutely, absolutely. And for me, cities is a very crucial union in the history of non-racial rugby. As we mentioned earlier on, the 1936 split between the league and the board, and then when it came to the formation of the South African Rugby Federation, and remember, Cities was an independent union. They didn't affiliate with the South African Coloured Rugby Football Board. They were indirectly affiliated by the Western Province League, but they maintained their independence right through until 1963, when they were forced to make a decision whether to join the South African Coloured Rugby Football Board or the Federation, which was formed in '59. They eventually decided to join the Federation, but all that time, the President J.B. Page was trying to bring the Coloured Rugby Football Board and the Federation together, the likes of Kester on the side of the board, and Ayala Bus, and the other side, Cuthbert Larston. And Page was always trying to bring them together. Unfortunately, he couldn't do that. Unfortunately, then they joined the Federation. And that lasted for 2 years, and then they threw in their lot with the South African Rugby Union, which was formed on the 28th of May '66. And Cities was crucial to that, because you can imagine it's the only black union with their own ground. They were financially stable, and they were administratively superb. And with SARU being a fledgling body, although it was formed on the back of the Coloured Rugby Football Board, Cities actually financed SARU quite heavily, or subsidized it in the early years of the government to get big. And that level of organization was once again shown in 1981 when they started the Top 8 tournament, which was popular. I mean, over Easter weekend you could go to City Park on the tournament started on a Wednesday evening, the lights first at City Park and then at the Athletics Stadium. Right through Saturday was completely full, and the tournament became a national tournament as well. So people from Port Elizabeth, Joburg, Eastern, all over came, especially to City Park, to come and watch and see their team in action at the Top 8 tournament, which was a fantastic event. I mean, I spoke to Alistair Coetzee and Peter de Villiers, who both played in that tournament, and they still speak very fondly of that tournament, you know. And again, the level of organization with City and Suburban, they got the clubs, their own clubs, to accommodate teams. They hired the Lutheran Hostel, for example, to accommodate teams, and on the Good Friday, they organized for their own teams to take these teams out, and it was just a fantastic experience. And that's basically, unfortunately for Cities, as I said, they only won the Rhodes Trophy in 1967, and that was it. They were so desperate, they even tried to recruit Sid Miller to come and coach in the British Lions coach in 1974, to come and coach them to help them, because they certainly had the players, but for some reason or other, there just didn't seem to be the loyalty among the club players to the union. So, and of course these guys, that was another story playing Western Province, you know. So the moment guys were selected in the week, the guys would withdraw on a Tuesday, and even on a Saturday morning before the game, the guys would withdraw, and then so they playing Western Province. But that's basically in a nutshell, and I must say, I found Jonty's book a valuable resource, and I take my hat off to Jonty. I mean, the book that he did on from Hendricks, for example, to Black to Red Whites. Just going through those newspapers of the 1800s, in a single column newspapers, and to get all that information, that's literally looking for a needle in a haystack. And I remember one day it was just about closing time, and I just happened to come across a match report of the Cities versus Western Province game. Was played at Newlands in 1905. They were just about to close the library, and I found that report in the August in 1905. But that's why I take my hat off to Jonty, who's gone through all these manuscripts, all these newspapers, through the archives, and really produced what, as Hendrik has mentioned, probably one of the most comprehensive histories of South African rugby. And I just hope that we'll be able to build on this to tell the complete story. Because there are unions like Western Province, Transvaal, Griquas, Eastern Province, you know, who have similar histories. Sorry if I've taken up too much of that.
That's wonderful. Thanks very much, Mohammed. Wally, I called you. He's my old cricket teammate, but his name is Ibrahim Khanif now. I had to think of beyond Wally. And he played for SARU and Western Province. Hendrik, do you want to say, you and Dougie say a few words just on the importance, where rugby history is in relation to this book, and, you know, where are we now in terms of this, our age group feeling the need to write this history, and young people today, do they actually care about it, and what difference does it make, and so on. Maybe you can just share a few ideas.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. I just need first to warn you, don't erase Bolly from the historical record. The terror of Western Province in both the Rhodes Cup and the SA Cup is legendary. I remember one report in the Cape Standard of 1914 tells us that Western Province was behind. And there was a mass invasion. So the police had to intervene in order for the match to proceed. Obviously Western Province lost that game. So I posted this verbatim report on Facebook, and I was nearly killed on Facebook. Because as a member of the old Western Province country districts, we are regarded as an offspring of Western Province, so I wasn't supposed to say these things. But in terms of your question, Andre, the one problem that I as an historian had for a very long time is bits and pieces of history, specifically our rugby history. In fact, the situation that we had for a very long time before John T. Winch's record is what I would call almost ghettos of history. You will get a little bit of history of the Federation written by, as part of Paul Dobson's mandate after 100 years of the SA Rugby Board, to insert a little ghetto of history there. But then, because Rugby Union hated Rugby League, the 13-player version, it was totally excluded from that centenary history. And then we had 112 years tests and heroes when we had rugby unification, and the scale tipped to the other side. We wanted to make the point that black rugby players have a substantial legacy in the game. But nowhere did we find one integrated history that tells us two things. There were different rugby traditions that sometimes flow in one direction, in one stream, and oftentimes there would be branches and then they would regroup at some point again. I think, and that is, in my mind, the value of John T's work. That he presented South Africans and world rugby for the first time with one narrative that dips in everywhere where the river flowed. And in the end, we can really say this tells or gives us a reliable and valid version of our past. Obviously, with that work, John T sets a new bar for all of us. Obviously, the detail of 26 unions under the SA Rugby Union, SARU, from Western Province, country districts, to the Victoria East Rugby Union, their story still needs to be told. My own work quite recently was on the history of sevens rugby in South Africa, for Blitzboks. After John T's work, even that work will have to be reviewed in the light of some new information. Because the one weakness that I've picked up is, for example, very little has been written on sevens rugby within the black community. Yet we used to play it. It used to be a feature of our rugby landscape. The other thing that John T merely gave us a taste of, the place of females in the game. Nothing much has been written. In fact, the last count, except for my own work, was a sports science study about the factors that impact on the growth and flourishing of South African women's rugby. One of the most neglected sports at this particular point in time. So that is one of the challenges that John T also places on the table for the next generation of historians. The history of women's rugby. Obviously the history of rugby league in South Africa. Thus far I'm the only person working in that field. But surely there should be others with their own insights into the long history of money in the game. We are in a professional era now, where people can deliberately make a choice of making a life out of rugby. But we are faced with the challenge of merit in a professional setup. The best should represent South Africa, but what about the challenge of transformation and all of that? So John T sets the bar for us, but John T at the same time say to us, now that you have a solid general history of South African rugby, now you can dig into the finer detail like Mo has just begun to do. I'm looking forward to a story of Western Province, the powerhouse of South African rugby. And as far as Dougie's work is concerned, I mean, the split in '92 that gave birth to the South African Council on Sport, or the SACOS Rugby Union, is still outstanding. And surely it should form part of your work. And then just the last one, John, Dougie. You work on Eisenhower. He was a Club Jazz player, apparently, as well. Didn't last long. Didn't last long, because word has it that, because we know Asa, very forthright, very straight, very clear about his ideological position. So those are some of the work that waits for us. Because what John T also pointed out in his work is the multiple identities of administrators and players. They were in cricket, they were in rugby, they were in clavages, they were in dominoes, they were in almost everything. So those are the challenges for the new generation and current generation of historians.
Thanks, Hendrik. Will you just tell us a little about the black rugby players who, because they didn't get opportunities here, went and played for money in rugby league in England? How many, who did they play with? So, just quickly.
Yeah, professionalism in rugby, what today is called rugby union, started already in the 19th century. And one of the first reported incidences of a player being accused of playing or leaving his union and club to play for another took place as far as the same week in 1895 that the Northern Rugby Football Union, that became the father or the mother of rugby league, was born. This guy's name was Jumpers. Now Jumpers apparently ended up in the Free State playing for money. And Jumpers' story opened up a hunt for South African players that were good enough to play overseas against remuneration or payment. So during the first phase of the 20th century, there were approaches, but not a lot of them went. And then came apartheid in 48, the denial of the right of black sportsmen to participate and represent South Africa internationally. By the 1950s, the rugby administrators were making active plans of sending their own black and colored or whatever teams overseas. And there was a crisis at that point in British Rugby League. They couldn't import Australians and New Zealand players anymore because of the restriction. Those were rugby league countries. And the only thing that the English Rugby League authorities would allow is players from overseas that never played rugby league. Now, rugby league differs from rugby in the sense that union had 15 players, this is the game that we know, league progressively got 30. They don't scrum competitively. They don't have lineouts, that sort of thing. That's the technical differences. So what happened was in the 1950s we had Ghulam Abed, that Mo wrote about, a star Western Province player and cricketer. You had, in City and Suburban, you had Louis Newman, a robust and very capable lock forward. Within the domain of African rugby, you had guys with the names of Enslan Lambulu, Antile Pikole, Winti Pandle. These were people that represented the different national unions as Springboks. They called themselves Coloured Springboks and African Springboks and so on. And these guys got recruited around about 1957. They went to Britain to go and play for money. Ghulam combined it with cricket. So he had life as a professional cricketer and as a professional rugby player. So during that first phase, there were about 7 to 10 black South Africans playing within the British leagues, together and against their white counterparts that were also recruited. In fact, there was at one point that for the club Bradford Northern, there were 4 South Africans playing for Bradford Northern. Enslan Lambulu, African Springbok. Ghulam Abed, Coloured Springbok. Louis Newman, City and Suburban and also close to the Federation side at the time. And with them was the white Springbok, Colin Greenwood. So they literally had to go overseas to play on merit as equals. But we also have sad stories like the story of Sally Skruder, that he was a Western Province player, went overseas, fell in love with a British girl, and the matter ended tragically with a suicide. But they were followed in 1970 by people like David Barnes, originally from Elam, but also played for Western Province and Cities. We went and played for York, ended up Bradford Northern, Oldham, that is David Barnes. And in the 70s, around about December 70, Green Vigo, the Saldanha fisherman in Protea, was recruited. Became a star at Wigan. Scored in one game 7 tries. They called him the Iron Horse. Even today, an iconic figure. And he was followed in the 80s like, maybe you'll remember a little guy who used to play for Eastern Province, they called him China Bell. China went over, played rugby league in Australia. Louis Newman coincidentally died in Australia in 2003, where he made a name for himself He was a star at Leeds in the UK. He was a star in Sydney. And he ended up playing in New South Wales in a little city called Orange, where he was a coach, he was a player. And these guys left an indelible mark on rugby league in Australia and in the UK. And they only went there because of lack of opportunity at home. Some of them, like Louis and Green and David, are still highly regarded where they find themselves. Green still lives in Manchester. Louis buried in New South Wales. David still lives in a little town called Hamsworth. So those are the hidden stories. And the sad part, in conclusion, for me as an historian, but also as a sports loving South African, is the fact that most of our rugby, most of our sports federations have no official histories on their official websites. It is as if these things never happened, and that's the sad thing, and we need to reclaim.
You see, there are people who've got lots to say, Jeremy, and right. That is wonderful to listen to you. It's just pure from the inside and love for what you do. So, now, we're going to end now, after we've given Dougie 5 to 10. Got to hear Dougie. He's writing a biography of Eisenhower, which is probably one of the most relevant topics in this whole area, I think, in terms of biography. So, but also, Dougie, we love you for your resilience and for your chirpiness on Facebook and other things, okay? Dougie cannot be put down by pompous people and important people. He says what he thinks. Okay.
Yeah. I think for me working on this book was an absolute eye-opener. I thought I knew everything, to be honest.
Dougie edited,
yeah.
helped Muhammad edit the book.
And then, you come across things where people, communities, and with city and suburban community, in many ways acted almost exactly like the white governing party, actually, in a lot of attitudes that they had. There was a question of Muslims, they, for a long time they couldn't,
And Africans.
yeah, Muslims, Africans, they didn't mention, well, from the research material, you see the name African mentioned all that much, but you could, if you read between the lines, you could actually see things, and you heard of things like pencil tests and stuff like that, so you knew what was happening there. But, so you go on through the years, and suddenly they get shifted, they lose their ground in Mowbray, Sydney suburban, and they move over to, eventually, after playing in little fields all over the place, and actually they should not have survived. It was, I still can't think how they managed to continue playing, and then getting the city park, and still having the enough players and teams to actually go up the city park. And then you have this amazing change of attitude, where suddenly they become a community union. I think Muhammad mentioned that Imam Harun's funeral, they had these Christmas choirs, school, inter-house schools meetings, because the schools couldn't afford to pay for grounds elsewhere, and they got it for, I don't know, next to nothing at City and Suburban. And suddenly, City and Suburban became a really strong, true, non-racial body, in my opinion. And, you had this body that before that, were really, a colored version of of the white national party in many ways. You know, it was, I just, to me, that was the most amazing part of of this journey actually. And I think for me it was a journey. You know, suddenly you started in 1898, and in fact before that, because you started with the Western Province Rugby Union, and then you have these guys sort of sitting, waiting, and then suddenly they have enough teams to form a Christian union, and away we go. And it's, you know, I read quite a lot of sports books, and not because I worked on this particular one, but I think it's to me it's probably one of the really better sports books that I've come across. I'd say best, but I don't want to say because I worked on it.
No,
That's fine.
Dougie, thanks for
Thanks.
coming in at the end. We'll have a special evening for you sometime. So Jeremy, thanks very much, and Sam and Shanice for, you know, the book and its launch, and hopefully John T will see some of this discussion. It's really a work that John T has now done 4 books in the last 6 years. He did his masters at Leicester and got very distinctions and prizes for his writing, and he did his PhD at Stellenbosch, but he just keeps on churning it out, and it's very valuable stuff. My favorite chapter in this is, I think, I'll look quickly, chapter 5, that deals with Robert Grendon, who was the son of an Irishman who married a Namibian chief's daughter. When his mother died, his dad brought him to Zonnebloem College for the sons of chiefs here in District 6. And he was a complete kind of Renaissance man. He was amazingly good at cricket and rugby, athletics meetings, sports administration, musical recitals, botanizing, forays into literature, freelance newspaper work, and always politics. It's just absolutely amazing. We've heard from Muhammad and, you know, and others about the journeys that people have been on, and where Louis Neumann has ended up in Sydney, buried there. And this one journey of this guy in the 1800s, in the 1880s and 1890s, John T is really put out there for us in a fantastic way. On a personal level, a human being who became a poet, a newspaper editor, the tutor to the King of Swaziland, Sobhuza, and ended up dying apparently in a hut in Swaziland, basically poor and sort of forgotten, but having lived this incredible life. Reminds me of our opera singer who died in Rocklands the other day. Brand Arm, as they said in the report. How we use people, pluck them out, and they get unlooked after. But the courage of those journeys of Robert Grendon, the phenomenal, because I know the cricket side, skill that he had, the intellect. He edited Abantu Bato and Ilanga La Natal. He was a black consciousness follower already in the 1890s because he believed colored people should join with Africans in South Africa. So all these multiple identities, different layers of life experience and different phases of history that we go through, that we can very vividly portray through our sport research and writing, I think is fantastic. And this whole thing of identity is still so crucial today in South Africa. What are we? And I think the stories here and also here, and what we're learning today is not to try and impose one narrative over a story. That he's finding out things about city and suburban that he can hardly believe. And it's by bringing out that stuff that we start finding the rich textures of our society and lives. And all the things that people, I believe, in their own little lives heroically sort of struggle towards understanding and a full humanity, basically. All by doing sport history. Thanks very much, you guys. And also to John T, well done. Dougie?
This is one other thing that I got to mention, actually, was the role that newspapers actually played in that period. The Cape Sun and then after that, I think the Cape Standard came afterwards. And they sort of showed or they expressed views that a lot of people in the rugby, certain cities in Bergen, seem to follow. And then there was one interesting little story actually that so you had the Sun and the Cape Standard, and then at Mowbray one day, Benny Kiss's torch. You can't really, I don't think it was a newspaper, but it was a little publication.
Teachers League, was it?
Yeah.
I was the Unity Movement.
Yeah, and he approached them and he wanted to collect money for the torches, and they actually turned it down. You know, so you can actually see how these things, these newspapers, the role that they play in the thinking of people like you know, was Fraser around at that time?
No,
With us, no.
he was young,
Yeah.
but he wasn't an official at that time.
Yeah. Anyway, I just thought that I'd mention that as well.
Well, that's it, guys. Thanks. Any other comments? Okay.
But maybe just on what Doug is saying, I remember as a kid going to Harold Cressy, which was totally Teachers League, and being one of the sort of bright kids there, and we weren't going to compromise it. You shouldn't go to UWC and all of those kind of things. And my father committed two cardinal sins. The one is the Montroses met with the British Lions and had hosted them, and that I kind of understood it as a daughter, and on the other hand, I was asked, how can I be this activist with those sort of things? The other side of it was that my father was very outspoken about politics, but I asked him why he read the Herald, and he said to me, the point about reading the Herald is you actually hear many voices, and don't think that because it's located in one area that all the opinions have to be the same. And then to bring it back to here, he said, for example, people enjoy sport and they look to the Herald for the sport. But when the way the stories are written, you actually learn some things that you don't know you know. And that was something that I grew up never ever knowing I was going to marry a sports and historian. But the nuances that you speak about, I mean, and again, our house, and with all of that, our house was a place where a lot of the people that you speak about met in our dining room, you know, in various meetings, and I just knew them drinking tea as good little girls do, and nothing else. And much later, I realized what all had been happening there.
I'll take back the mic to be in the chair at the end of the Thanks very much, everyone. Take care. There's some refreshments there provided by everyone. Thanks a lot.
I'd like to say I've learned a lot today.
Thank you. What is your name?
My name is Serena, and I was just passing by.
Okay.
Coming to Exclusive Bookstore, but really, I mean, I love here, but in my family they don't play sport. So it's like, am I from Peter? I've learned so much in the short
If I could
time.
just, for me, the most satisfying thing about doing the City and Suburban book is how, the reaction of the city and suburban officials. And they really did, and they did a centenary publication, they went through those moments, but there was so much that they didn't know, they were shocked by.
Yeah.
And that was for me the most pleasing thing about doing this book.
That's really,
I mean-
really informative.
What the last thing that Dagi asked about the role of newspapers. I mean, what I've discovered, in the absence of official archives, newspaper archives are the only record that we can use to reconstruct the story. I mean, let me take the example of Clover Just. Big thing in Cape Town. In fact, the Spelmans is the only one, other than pockets in the PE, that have a union that run a codified sport. The South Peninsula Clavias Union, for example, was the driving force behind the establishment of a national body, the South African Clavias Board of Control, that affiliated with CESCO. What I've also discovered is that South Africa, or the South Peninsula Clavias Union, was the second one in the world after the Dutch Clavias Federation to codify the sport, to make it an official sport. And then I started to discover the Jewish version of Klovjosh, or Klaverjas. And you suddenly discovered, but that was not the only card games played by people in the Cape Flats. You discovered there was the Cape Peninsula Bridge Union. People were playing bridge, organized, and they play casino, which is also a card game, in an organized, codified fashion. It's not like, I mean, I'm from the West Coast. People will tell you, all that we need is a bottle and a kiss, you know. But what you discover when you work through this old newspaper, you find this very strong drive for respectability, for having an intellectual activity, in poker, bridge, casino, chess, and all of that. Chess, all of that.
Okay, the debate will, we must get together more often. Thank you.
Thank you.